Can you tell me a little bit about that? I don't know, your intellectual predisposition to be reading astronomy books when you're 7 years old?
Well, I'm on the autistic spectrum, and people on the autistic spectrum tend to focus on one little discipline and tend to dive deep into it. So that was me. I wasn't really talking until the second grade. My parents said I did pretty well with 3 words: yes, no, and cookie. So, and being on the spectrum, I got discipline for being blunt. So as a young child, it wasn't that I couldn't talk. I knew if I talked, I would get into trouble. So I just kept quiet. But I realized I almost failed grade 1. I wasn't talking. I couldn't prove I could read. And I also had fine motor disabilities. I couldn't make a pencil do numbers or letters. So literally in grade 1, I was failing everything. Fortunately, my parents moved out of a small rented home. They bought a condemned house and began to rebuild it. So I had a different grade 1 teacher for the last 6 weeks of the year. And I write about her story in one of my books, Always Be Ready, because she could tell that I was frustrated. So I remember towards just a few days before the end of the school year, she held me after school, waited for all the other children to leave, and said, I'm going to ask you questions about these 30 books on my desk. All you need to do is nod your head for yes and shake your head for no. She determined that I had read those books. So she said, I know you're failing everything, but I'm going to do what I can to get you into the second grade. So she talked to the principal, and I remember the last day of school, she read the names of the 38 pupils in her class from the top academic ranking down to the bottom. And my name was number 36. Number 37 and 38 had to repeat grade 1. So I was at the very bottom of the list of people that passed. And I knew that. That shook me up. So I said, I'm going to have to start talking, even if I get into trouble, and I got to figure out how to use a pencil to make numbers and letters. And all throughout the summer vacation, my parents thought I was obsessive, because literally I would spend hours a day practicing to make letters and numbers with a pencil. At the beginning of grade 2, I could do it very slow, but I could do it. And I began to talk. But I remember the first day of grade 2, I was in the very last chair, because at that time in Canada, they sat you academically, in academic rank.
Wow.
All the kids were basically ridiculing me as a class dummy. And I said, I'm not going to be in the last chair. I'm going to do what I can to move up. And every 3 weeks, they would reseat us. And I began to slowly move forward. By the end of grade 2, I was in the first chair, and I was reading 4 or 5 books on physics and astronomy a week. So, and that passion for astronomy and physics continues to this day.
Mm.
I mean, I love reading the scientific literature.
Mm. And this is like academic literature you're reading at this point?
Yes. I mean, well, I remember our grade 2 teacher took us on a field trip to the Vancouver Public Library, and each of us got a library pass, and she showed us how to take 3 buses to get to the library. You know, back in the 1950s, parents were okay with putting a 7-year-old boy on a bus where you got to transfer twice to get to the library all by myself. I mean, no parent in their right mind would do that today, but that was pretty typical back then. So, but I remember reading everything they had on physics and astronomy and chemistry in the children's library. And so I remember at the end of grade 2 begging the librarian, can you please give me an adult pass? And she said, we've never done that before, but given that you've read everything here, we're going to make an exception. But she says, the adults there are not going to be happy seeing you. Keep quiet. I said, I can do that. And she said, if they complain, talk to me. And so a couple of them did complain. I talked to her and she interceded on my behalf. So then I read the books in the adult section, and eventually I got a card for the university library.
Wow. And was that UBC or where were you?
UBC, yeah, it was the only university in the province at the time.
Mm. So, what would that have been like socially for you? You're reading far beyond all your peers and you're obsessed with a subject I'm assuming none of them were interested in at that age.
No, but they were interested in other things. I mean, I grew up in a rather unusual neighborhood. It was a very poor neighborhood. I mean, people call it a slum. Very poor neighborhood of Vancouver, but it was filled with immigrants from around the world. And in one sense, our family was an immigrant. My dad had a major hydraulic engineering business in Montreal, but his financial partner bankrupted him. So we had to shut down the business, move to Vancouver. He only had a 10th grade education, so he had to take a job as a machinist. He couldn't work as an engineer, even though he had supervised 40 engineers when he had that business. So we were starting from scratch. But all these immigrants were also starting from scratch. And most of these immigrant families were intellectuals from Asia and Eastern Europe. I mean, we had waves of immigrants that would come into our school. I mean, the East German Revolution of '53, we had a wave of East Germans come into our school. We had Koreans from the Korean War come into our school. Then the Hungarian Revolution in '58. So that's what's kind of our neighborhood. We had Ukrainians, Hungarians, Czechoslovakians. That was 1962. But all of these were families where the parents invested heavily in their children's education. So in fact, our small high school was the smallest high school in Vancouver. We graduated 6 of the top 10 students in the whole province.
Wow.
So it was an unusual school. So I didn't feel out of place. A lot of my friends growing up in the elementary school were also picking highly academic careers out at ages 9, 10. I happen to be the youngest at 7, but I did not feel out of place.
And did you make friends with kids like that who were challenging you intellectually? And
Well, especially because in high school, this was a time when Americans were worried that we were losing the space race and the science race to the Soviets.
right.
And there was this American philanthropist who gave the city of Vancouver a significant sum of money to pull the 25 top science students out of the schools and give them a university-level education while they were still in high school. And you had to take a test that lasted almost 10 hours. So I was in this room, a 10-hour test, and you had to be interviewed by a psychiatrist. But I managed to get into that group at grade 10. That was the youngest. There were only 2 of us who were in grade 10 that made it into that group. But there I was surrounded with people who were, very intelligent and highly motivated to work, to pursue their careers in science. But I remember one of the 25, we were both in a chess tournament, a province-wide chess tournament, and he was undefeated. And I said, Duncan, how long you been playing chess? And he says, well, almost 6 weeks. My dad taught me about 6 weeks ago. And a few months later, he was a Canadian national champion. And I remember taking a math class with him. And the professor would put up this blackboard filled with equations and said, you all got 1 week to get the answer. And Duncan would sit up and says, I got it solved. He just looked at it and he had it solved.
Wow.
So he had a capacity to do theoretical mathematics that was way beyond what any of us could do. But each of us 25, we had some special gifting.
Sure.
So we really helped one another.
Interesting. What did he end up doing?
He ended up becoming a math professor. He also would supplement his professor salary by taking trips to San Francisco to play chess for money with people on the street. So,
wow, really? That's crazy. Do you keep in contact with any of those?
With a few. I mean, some have passed away, but yeah. And that program was not just Vancouver. They did it in several cities around North America. And, those people that went through, it's called the Berg Science Seminars. They wound up becoming some of the leading scientists,
Wow.
not only in the country, but the world.